My name is Hannah, and I recently saw my father's true identity and was amazed. It turns out that he was not who he claimed to be all these years. Now I'm not sure I love him. I'm more afraid. The fact is that not so long ago, my parents divorced, and I chose my father so that he would not be lonely. I knew that my mother was strong and she would survive the divorce, especially since it was her initiative. But my father, I was worried about him because he was always not independent, vulnerable. Even though he was in the police, when he came home, he took off his uniform and became my daddy. As for the divorce, their relationship had not been going well for a long time. I couldn't bear to listen to the daily scandals and threats. I couldn't stand it, so I picked up another broken plate and told them to get a divorce. I don't know about your patience, but mine is broken. They both froze, looked at me, and realized that it was finally time to talk to their child. We sat down at the table, but I did the most talking. I was old enough to know that part of the reason they put up with each other was because of me. But I said it was okay. Mom, I'll stay with my dad. No offense, but I'm worried about him. My mother argued for a long time and said that it would be better for me to be with her, but I insisted on my own. When my father heard about my offer, he was very surprised and happy. I've been thinking it over for a long time. It's better for everyone. Immediately after the divorce, my mother went to another country. She promised to come to me for all the holidays, which suited me. To be honest, I was closer to my father. My mother often went somewhere and we were alone, ordering pizza, my favorite snacks, and a lot of soda. The best nights were to eat in front of the TV until late at night. That was my thing with Dad. So when they got divorced, it didn't seem so bad. My dad and I sold the house and moved into an apartment. Just like before, my dad came home very late, and I was already asleep. I took care of the household chores, cleaning, washing, and some cooking. My father wasn't fussy, and sometimes he and his fellow police officers didn't have time to eat at all. So they caught criminals on an empty stomach. It was dangerous work. He was often catching the bad people, an environment which is always dreaming of revenge. The attackers found out that my parents were divorced, and I was left at home alone. As usual, unsuspecting, I ate my supper and went to bed. Already in a deep sleep, I thought I heard rustling in the apartment. I thought it was my dad coming home from work. Before I could really open my eyes, someone bumped into me, closing my mouth with such force that I couldn't move my mouth. Masked men tied my hands and feet in seconds. I was terrified and panicked, ready to scream with all my might. I thought I was going to die. My blood froze with fear, and I had a million thoughts about being killed. I prayed to God that my father would come home soon. There were 3 outsiders. They searched and turned over the whole house. Apparently, they thought that the necessary thing was stored here, but they did not know that my father did not bring anything home from work to avoid such situations. The masked men took everything of value. I was shaking and crying with horror, and they decided to take me with them before they left. My body resisted, and my temperature rose with anger. The bastards didn't care that I was a teenager. With my mouth tied, I couldn't call for help. I wish Dad would come soon, I thought for the last time. And suddenly, I saw one of the bandits fall to the floor. The second gets a foot in the face. It was my father. He's here. My eyes were still streaming with tears, but I felt a sharp sense of relief. I had no doubt that my father would save me. In a matter of minutes, he had 3 of them down. At this time, I had managed to free my hands and mouth. I sat on the floor and breathed deeply, still unable to speak. 2 were unconscious. Dad went to the 3rd one and asked what they wanted. The bandit only spat in his face, which angered my father. Dad threw him to the floor and hit him in the face with all his fury. He was already unconscious. I think his nose was broken. His teeth were knocked out. There was blood everywhere, and Dad didn't stop. He beat and beat on the head with his fists. I shouted, "Dad, stop! Stop it! Enough! You'll kill him!" Then I ran to him, but he pushed me with a bloody hand so hard that my body flew away like a doll for several meters. There was a fire in my father's eyes, as if he had passed out and was being controlled by the devil himself. It was a terrible sight. I was even more terrified than when I was kidnapped. The two men came to their senses and tried to escape, but my father took out a rifle and shot it right in front of me in our house. Only then did he exhale and calm down. I've never seen such a monster in my life. I became afraid of him. He saw it and understood it. I didn't speak to him for about a week, and then he called me over to talk. I know you're afraid of me. I'm sorry you saw all this. I didn't want to, but this is how I am at work. I am a police officer, and I have to fight crime. And here, the situation was doubly terrible. These bastards try to take away my most valuable thing. You. I didn't want you to see dead people, and I didn't want you to know that your dad can kill, but I want you to know that when I'm eating pizza with you or watching cartoons, I'm real. I will never hurt you in my life, daughter. I'm still your dad, he said. Yes, I wanted to hear those words. I burst into tears and hugged him for the first time in so long. Then he said he couldn't risk my life, so he called my mother and told her everything. A minute later, she appeared on the doorstep. I can't risk your life. My job is too dangerous. It will be better if you live with your mother, and I will visit you, he said. I felt sad. I didn't want to leave him, but I knew that he would feel much more confident knowing that his daughter was safe. So I didn't say anything and went to get my things. I gave him one last big hug, and he said I was the only one who made him better every day. Who knows? We're all not perfect. The father in the devil's guise was protecting his child. Can it be justly justified? Subscribe to this channel, because there are still many cool stories.
I'm Charlotte. Just a month ago, I managed to get out of my boyfriend's trap. Ex-boyfriend, actually. I'm still reeling from the horror I've been through. And the first thing I found out is that my boyfriend is actually a maniac. I'll tell you about it because I can't keep silent any longer. In the meantime, subscribe and watch other animations. After all, we still have a lot of interesting stories. Anyway, it was winter when we met Benjamin. We ran into him at the ice rink. Everything seemed so romantic. Benj kept me warm with his jacket that night, buying hot coffee while we went for a ride. And in the late afternoon, we went to a dinner and ate burgers, and after that, he didn't walk me home. It was wonderful. I laughed a lot with him, and Benjamin could make jokes. Then he showed up the next day, invited me for a walk, and the next day we went to a movie, to a cafe. Each time he came up with a new occupation. We saw each other every day, and when it didn't work out, he wrote or called. Imperceptibly, feelings grew. I introduced him to my friends, mother, and sister. Even though it hadn't been long since we'd started dating, I felt like I loved him. He made a positive impression on everyone, and I was proud of it. Benj himself was a little older than me. He was the only man in the family, so he earned as much as he could to support the family, his mother and brother. I was struck by his strength of spirit, the optimism that he exuded. Several times he left for work in another city, but never forgot to bring back some souvenir. However, he never told me exactly what he did, and I didn't know where he lived. These things didn't bother me at all, because the main thing was his attitude and love. About 3 months later, Benjamin invited me to spend the weekend with him. He rented a small cottage in the mountains. It was already spring, and the view from there promised to be amazing. I told my mother I was going to Tiffany's to study for my school exam, and I went with him. My girlfriend promised to cover for me. That's why I loved her the most. She told me not to worry about anything and to rest. What could sound better? I quickly packed my bag and ran out of the house. My boyfriend was already waiting for me on the street. We jumped in the car and drove off. Despite the fact that it was raining and it was cool, the mood was good. Spring, after all. A couple of hours later, we arrived at this cottage. It was beautiful, small, incredibly cozy. There were only 4 rooms, and the living room with the fireplace was the largest. It was warm inside, and there were groceries in the kitchen. It turns out that Benjamin had already made supplies for us. I offered to make pasta, but he said that he would do everything himself. Poured me wine, sat me in a chair, covered me with a blanket, and went to cook, while I watched my favorite TV series on my laptop and waited for dinner. From the kitchen floated a delicious smell of something meat. After a couple of hours, Benj called for food, and he cooked chicken in the oven and a salad. After a big dinner, we went out on the porch, but he stood behind me and hugged me, talking about his feelings. I don't think I've ever been happier. It was beautiful. Suddenly his phone rang and he went into the house, and I wanted to enjoy the cool air and I stayed. A second later, I heard the sound of a voice, or I thought I heard it. I started to listen, but it was hard to do because of the rain. The strange thing was that there was nothing else nearby except our house. Voices from the basement? Then someone touched my shoulder sharply from behind, and I screamed and shuddered. It was Benj. "What are you doing? Is everything okay? Can you have enough wine already?" he said, laughing. Then he apologized and said he needed to leave for a couple of hours. His friend had a flat tire in his car, and he was stuck not far from here, and he needed help. I nodded my head and said that everything was fine. I would wait for him here. Benji started the car and drove away. I went inside and poured myself more wine. The empty house didn't look so nice to me now. As soon as I sat back in my chair, the same voices rang out in my head. I tried to distract myself by turning up the volume on the show, but I kept thinking about that voice. Am I being paranoid? Turning off the computer, I lay down on the floor and tapped my fist several times. And I was answered. Oh my God! I knocked again and heard, "Save!" I was terrified. I got up abruptly from the floor and didn't know what to do. Then I heard the blows and pleas for help even more clearly. I was so scared that I wanted to run. I ran out into the street, reached the gate, and stopped. Something made me come back. I knew the sounds were coming from underground. I ran into the backyard and found a door leading to the basement, which was covered with boards. I could barely dig it out, and there was an iron lock on the door. I managed to break it with a crowbar. Then I saw steps leading down. It was damp, dark, and smelly. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and started walking slowly down the stairs. Inside, there were some unnecessary things and nothing else. Then I heard again, "Save!" It turns out there was another room. I opened the door and saw that inside the dim light is sitting some girl. Looking at me, she began to ask for help in a loud voice. My legs gave way from fear and my heart seemed to run into my heels. Somehow intuitively, I ran to her and untied her hands. The girl was unhurt, but very exhausted. She looked at me in the face and told me I had to run away. We held hands, but the door closed abruptly. She screamed, and I realized that Benjamin was back. I asked him to open the door, promising that everything would be kept secret, no one would find out what happened here. I swore. And he just said, "You're right. No one will know what happened here." And the footsteps began to move away. Emily, that's her name, got hysterical and started crying and said that he was going to come with a camera and start hitting us and taking pictures. This was his fetish, and it was the least of the evils that he did with other girls. "He's a real maniac!" screamed Emily. But I wasn't ready to give up, and I wasn't ready to panic. He left out one detail, my phone number. I immediately called the police and gave them my approximate location. Help should be here any minute. Suddenly, we heard the door begin to open slowly. I pressed myself as close to the wall as I could. Benj came down the steps, and I hit him in the back of the head with my phone. He fell, but got up quickly and hit me in the face. Then he started saying that no one would be able to get out of his trap and attacked me again. Amelia jumped on his back, but he deftly turned her over on the ground. I could already hear the dogs barking in the street. The police had arrived. We screamed as hard as we could. Employees quickly broke down the door to the basement. Benjamin did not even have time to think as he was handcuffed. Emily was very scared, and I was also in shock. It turns out that his name was not Benji, and he has recently been wanted in a neighboring town. His weakness is schoolgirls. In general, he is a pedophile with abnormal sadistic tendencies. Now he faces jail. While I don't go to the rink anymore.